Hi, my name is Zack Ruda. I am here on the traditional land of Wabanaki peoples, so-called Portland, Maine. I'm the director of an organization called Rewild Maine, which is based in this place, which is known to many as Portland. And I'm here to talk about rewilding urban spaces. I had to pay actually a lot of money to download this program, so don't copy it. Just joking. This is the first page, and I think that it's really important to just kind of revisit this information. Hopefully you can see it. Just as an overview, this is a brief history of the world. You know, this is one creation myth. This is the myth of science. This is a creation myth that was established by civilized colonial systems, right? So this is no more or less legitimate. I mean, there's many creation myths that say that humans have been here since the beginning of time. And I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that this is a creation myth too, right? So let's just keep that in mind, just kind of have a little bit of awareness. 4.5 billion years ago, give or take, that's when the Earth arrived. And it wasn't until 2.5 million years ago that we had the earliest Homo, and even before Homo, there's pre-hominids. The thing to understand here is that a lot of time passed in between 4.5 billion years and 2.5 million years. 2.5 million years is relatively recent, right? So, you know, this is an ancient community of life that we are kind of joining, late to the party joining. The other thing that I think is really interesting here is that, the earliest evidence of stone tools is around 3 million years old. And it's hard to make stone tools, right? It takes actually a little bit of talent and foresight and dexterity and control and patience and persistence, right? So if stone tools are 3 million years old, that means the earliest hominids were capable of probably more than stone tools, right? The archaeological evidence that we have from ancient human sites, from anything ancient, is confined to that which will not biodegrade. So we can find stone tools, we can find bones, we can find pottery shards, we can find charred wood, we can find cave paintings. But we're not going to be able to find ancient evidence of basketry. We're not going to be able to find ancient evidence of clothing, fiber arts, or leather making, because that stuff deteriorates, right? So that's the thing to understand at this step, is that there was a lot going on 3 million years ago. And these are not Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens didn't show up until 200,000 or 300,000 years ago, right? And this date is kind of always being messed with, and new evidence is kind of, all this stuff is continuously up for discussion, right? Our culture's understanding of the world is not developed. Our culture's understanding of the world is underdeveloped and is being developed, and we're still learning. So let's stay humble. 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens. And the point to understand here is that our brains have not changed. You know, there's this semi-arbitrary distinction of Homo sapiens sapiens, which, as I understand it, is really a distinction being made about the origins of domestication, right? So if we had a time machine, if we wanted to go back in time and try to explain some esoteric, difficult, complicated, modern concept, philosophical concept, or some new piece of technology, the only barrier of understanding between us and the earliest humans would be language, right? So they're not stupid. Ancient humans are not stupid. Uncivilized humans aren't stupid, weren't stupid, and aren't stupid, right? So we have this understanding, we still subscribe to the myth of linear cultural evolution, which is this idea that the cultures evolve linearly along a progression towards industrialism. This is our ignorant assumption that we, as industrials, as settler descendants, right? Not all living humans are making this assumption, but certainly people who have been enculturated to live in industrial civilization are making the assumption that all human cultures progress linearly along this path. And it's false, right? It's false. So one time I tried for fun to try to calculate how many human societies have ever existed over the past 300,000 years. And, you try to think, how many cultures are there now? How many cultures were eradicated throughout the past thousands years of the spread of global colonialism? How many languages have we lost around the world? And then you try to do some math, which I'm terrible at math, and it's a lot of human societies. And not all human societies naturally progress towards industrial civilization. It's not true. 10,000 years ago, in various parts of the world, you see the first civilizations, which, first of all, is further telescopic nature, right? The 10,000 is 1/30th of 300,000. So that means that for 1/30th, only for 1/30th of the time that we've been alive, have civilizations ruled the planet or attempted to rule the planet. Just understand the timeline. 10,000 years is not that long compared to 300,000. So if just because we did it 29 times and it worked, and we tried a new way for the 30th time and it's not working, we could go back to the 29 times, or we could try to incorporate those 29 successful, times. 250 years ago, the Industrial Revolution, and look at how much we've changed. Look at what we have done. Look at what's been done to the world in the past 250 years. We've only had the internet at most for 50 years, and that's a heavy estimate. 10 years, how long have we had smartphones? 20 years? No, 2007 maybe, and we've got alienation. We've got, 12-year-old kids hanging themselves, not to go too dark, but that's just like, I cannot imagine a society where a child would commit suicide, and yet it happens in the society that we've created, right? In our society, it happens. So it's just important to recognize, we often think that this is the beginning of humanity. We think that where civilization started, that's where humanity started. That's when humans got smart. That's when humans really started reaching for the stars. And that it's really important to understand how culturally specific that interpretation of history is, because really humanity begins here, and there are a lot of different ways to be a human that don't involve destroying everything, which is basically what we do. Sticking with the directionality of the timeline, before we start talking about civilization again, just think, what does wildlife look like? What does wildlife look like? So, there's a few different things to talk about. We have this understanding of wilderness as untouched, right? Pristine. And it's really important to kind of dispel that myth too. A lot of people would say wilderness doesn't exist, right? Wilderness is a social construct, because a lot of the spaces that we think of as pristine, untouched spaces, when the colonists arrived in present day, what's known as California, they were amazed by the hills of wildflowers, and they thought, oh, these people are so lucky to live in a wonderland full of wildflowers. But what they didn't know is that every one of those wildflowers has an edible bulb. So the hills of wildflowers were in part created by human activity. I saw some article the other day, the Amazon rainforest is the world's oldest food forest. So there's a lot of understanding that wilderness is a social construct. Wilderness doesn't necessarily exist because, first of all, because humans have been interacting with wild spaces in a myriad of ways for longer than we've been willing to admit. We, the civilized, have been willing to admit. The other thing that's kind of cool to understand is just think about the origin of this word wild. Really actually goes back to an English word, but is connected with the understanding of willed. It's really willed, like a free-willed place, a place with its own will. And so in the same way that a river will, through the process of erosion, kind of develop a path, the river has a will as it cuts through the mountain and kind of carves a channel. All animals, right? Wild animals have their own free will. They have desires. They want to be safe and live with their families or be solitary if they're solitary creatures. there's no wilderness. So it's not about this idea of humans. If you think, what would wild humans look like? It's not about humans, dancing and prancing through the untouched wilderness, not making any decisions. What does wildlife look like? Really, it's almost like this whole talk is kind of ridiculous to give, right? The whole talk is kind of like a gotcha talk because you already know all this stuff if you think about it. Wildlife is basically just the opposite of civilized systems. It's indigenous peoples all over the world who are not colonizing, right? Who are not developing, who may wage war but do not conduct acts of genocide, right? And again, you could talk about I'm not. This is not like some white guy in my apartment here talking about all the indigenous peoples that have ever existed, right? It's not my business, it's not my place. I don't have the expertise or the knowledge, and nobody possibly could say this is what indigenous peoples have done, because 300,000 years of human history, how many cultures have ever existed? Everything is bioregionally specific. So this is the point. Wildlife looks different for different bioregions, cold weather climates, hot weather places. They're all different. And the people who historically have lived there, who maybe were colonized and driven out of there, people who still live there, right, still are holding on to their traditional life ways, resisting the colonization of civilization. It's bioregionally specific. So what that means is place-based, right? It's unique to the place. And so there's no way that anybody could say, this is what rewilding is. This is, hey, humans, I can't get on my little talk or my little soapbox and say, hey, people, let me tell you how to rewild, right? It's impossible, because these decisions historically have always been made by people in their communities based on the specific needs of the land with which they're cultivating relationship. And I can't tell you what it's going to look like. Maybe I could tell you what it might look like right here in so-called Portland, Maine, southern Maine, whatever you want to call it, whatever we're calling it. I can't even tell you what it looks like in my community, though. I can contribute to local movements, and we can do what we can. And we have to understand that whatever we're going to do is going to be specific to the bioregion, to the place. So we can't say, here's how to do it. I can't give global solutions. There's no, it's a fallacy. So what is this TEK? This is kind of a term that I'm happy to see get more and more trendy, and it's kind of a funny term, but what it stands for is traditional ecological knowledge. And so it's so funny. I don't know if you say his name, Vinny Deloria or Vine Deloria, wrote this book, Red Earth, White Lies, which is, one of the points that he's making is that indigenous peoples around the world have been trying to tell civilized supremacist, white supremacist colonizers, civilized colonizers, they've been trying to tell us. Some indigenous peoples would say, oh, we talk to plants. The plants communicate to us. And we say, yeah, right? We write it off as not true. And then it's not until some white guy pumps classical music and pumps heavy metal into a greenhouse, and then they say, oh, we proved that plants are tapped into these energies and plants can communicate, we can communicate with plants. And so it's funny now that as civilized, colonized, supremacist people have taken over the world, basically, while they're doing it, they're saying, we know best. We know we're making decisions for the whole world. We're hurting people in the process. And by the way, we've got a plan. Then it turns out that, right now, we don't have a plan. We don't know what we're doing. We're trying to figure out how do we live without destroying the entire everything. And we're turning now to TEK, traditional ecological knowledge. We're saying, okay, finally, people who we've been basically had the boot on their neck for generations, right, have been rubbing out of existence for hundreds of years. We're saying, hey, we're not even really saying sorry. We're not even really saying sorry about what we did, but we're basically saying, hey, sorry about what we did. Can you please teach us now how to not be bumbling fools, terrible people? So TEK is traditional ecological knowledge, and what it is traditional land-based, place-based indigenous peoples guess what? They didn't destroy the world, right? Guess what? They lived for hundreds of thousands of years, and they actually, guess what? They made the earth better, right? They actually made the place where they were living better. And if wildlife looks like anything, it looks like bioregionally specific traditional ecological knowledge, the knowledge that humans all around the world have developed about how to live in a specific place without killing it, without killing everything. So what it is it's a full embrace of natural systems. It's so funny. We have this idea of permaculture is like, make your garden more like nature, right? Oh, did you ever think you could model your garden after natural systems? Go figure. Not that we're not making decisions. It's that we are not making decisions arrogantly. Certainly we're taking feedback from other humans, but also from non-humans. We're taking feedback from natural systems, and we're trying to facilitate and encourage the growth that is already happening, the health that is already there. We're not cutting down the forest to make a cornfield. We are maybe we're weeding plants, maybe we're burning duff that needs to be burned. But so I'm going to jump around on this page, but this book, Tending the Wild by M. Cat Anderson, is really worth reading, and it's about it's basically about indigenous peoples' land management in what is now known as California. And so it doesn't have a lot to do with Maine, but there are a lot of themes that apply to peoples from all around the world, which is basically the theme. The theme is that humans have always interacted with so-called wild space, willed space. It could be argued that humans are a keystone species and have been since our inception, since our evolution millions of years ago. We have been tending the wild. So when we start interacting with natural systems, when we do permaculture in the forest or whatever, we really are, that's the most human. That's what it means to be human, right? We're in touch with our human nature in a real way. Rewilding urban spaces, that's what the talk is supposed to be about. And it's hard to rewild the urban spaces because civilization is expanding. You can hear construction in the background. I don't know if you can hear it, but the system is always continuing to colonization is happening right now, right? We are settlers, colonists. If we contribute to this system, we are colonizing wild space now. And so thinking about rewilding is really, you're touching on decolonization and kind of resisting colonization or contributing to decolonial movements. And here's what you can't, it's like there's a lot of kind of long list of what you can't do. And I think the next page is barriers, and we'll get to that. But here's what you can do as far as rewilding urban spaces. And this is not about rewilding humanity. A lot of what we do at Rewild Maine is kind of these programs like Rewild Yourself. Learn how to make a basket, learn how to forage for food or make medicine, learn how to connect. And that's not necessarily the same as rewilding the space, right? Making a decision for this space. But the access to wild space that we have in urban settings is fairly limited. We've got tree lawns, the berm in between the road and the sidewalk and all that, our lawn, front lawn, back lawn, community gardens, parks, food forests, and we can do the best we can with these. Everybody should have, if you have access to a lawn or a tree lawn or a sidewalk, why wouldn't you plant some perennial something, food for pollinators, food for people experiencing homelessness, food for your family? Why wouldn't you plant something other than grass? Right? Oh, because it's work, or it drops fruit on the sidewalk and then you got to sweep it up, or it attracts wildlife and you don't want that because we're trying to maintain control, right? The lawn is one of the most powerful symbols of supremacy worldwide, the grass lawn, right? Especially complete with fertilizer and all that. So if we live in a real urban space, I'm talking about Portland, Maine. So I'm from I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I lived for a while in New York City. Secret's out. I'm from away. Those people, and by those people I mean people in real urban settings, have even less access to wild space. So that's on the barriers page. Access to wild space is really a hugely overlooked privilege, really oftentimes, unfortunately, a facet of white privilege, that we up here in Maine is the whitest state in the United States out of all 50, and we have, a good amount of wild space. Access to wild space is a privilege, and this is not an argument, so you can't argue back, but I'm hearing your arguments anyway, and I've got rebuttals, and I'm right. So this is what's most exciting, is this unclaimed wild space to me, or urban wilderness, the kind of the area, the little patch of land behind the Home Depot that a lot of people chuck their trash in, but there's still a lot of sugar maples actually, and they're being choked out by invasive bittersweet, but there's some fox grapes who are kind of giving the bittersweet a run for their money, and if all they really is needed is one human to go in and clip a bunch of bittersweet, or better yet, a team of people, to basket makers, right? Take the bittersweet out, free the maples. The grapes have a shot at the sunlight, and the space says thank you. Tending the wild, right? So that's what it's all about. Tending the wild. If you have the privilege to have access to rural areas, if you have a giant lawn, if you have a community garden, go for it. If you do not, look to unclaimed wild space, because there are still robins and chickadees and little salamanders and snakes and rabbits and raccoons and foxes and coyotes, and they're calling us, right? They're doing their part. They're still doing their part, right? They're still playing their role, and they're kind of looking to us saying, what happened? You used to be in it here with me. So it's really about shifting of paradigms, and this is what we get back to, like with the human rewilding, like rewild yourself, is really, this idea that humanity is a synonym for civilization. What's on the next page? Oh, the next page is the barriers. So let's go back to barriers. We'll go back a page to barriers. So the idea that civilization is a synonym for humanity is it's just so insidious. It's in there. It's in the culture. It's in the memes. It's in our lessons. It's in all of us. Not all of us, but all of us who are settler colonialist descendants, right? All of us who were not raised in with any sort of indigenous traditional ecological knowledge or influence, right? I mean, I grew up in a city raised by two New Yorkers who like to go to the art museum. So I didn't learn anything about wild nature. All I learned was that there's bugs out there, okay? All I learned was that you're going to break your leg. That's what I learned. And I learned that civilization is a synonym for humanity. But you have to remember that civilization is a specific type of human society, right? Humans have existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and they don't always follow this path of linear cultural evolution. Is a myth. Civilization is a type of human society, and I love linguistics, so like wildness goes back to willed, free-willed. Civilization, the idea of civilized, it's funny that we have this word civilized, which is like keep your elbows off the table or like be polite. It's so funny that we have that understanding. You could make the argument that civilizations are the least civilized form of human society to have ever existed. And what it is, if you trace the linguistics, it goes back to the Greek civis, civics, right? Citizen. And it was always a supremacist. Historically, I mean, I don't know if all civilizations have always been white supremacist. That's a really interesting discussion for maybe the comment section or after class or whatever, and I would love to participate in that discussion. I don't know if civilizations have always been white supremacist, but they certainly have always been supremacist and exploitative, and maybe have always valued whiteness. So even the Greeks, when they said, we're citizens and they're barbarians, it's an otherization. And the difference, when the Greeks were making that distinction, they were saying these people are land-based peoples who live in the wild nature and poop in a hole, and we, the civilized, are over here, practicing pedophilia and slavery and okay, I'm going in too many directions here, but this is the point. Civilization is not humanity. It's not a synonym for humanity. So anybody who says humans are a virus, humanity is a virus, gag me. It's not true, and it's almost, you could say that it's racist, and it's whitewashing, and it's genocidal, and it's continuing the erasure of indigenous peoples to this day to say that humans are a virus. What you mean to say is civilization is a virus. What you mean to say probably is colonialism, colonization, supremacy is a virus, and supremacists are a virus, and this civilization is inherently exploitative, violent, and unsustainable. All civilizations that have ever existed have always been inherently to the structure exploitative, violent, unsustainable, probably racist and sexist and chauvinistic and patriarchal and all of those things. And if they weren't those things, if you could somehow make a civilization that wasn't exploitative and violent, I would argue that it's no longer a civilization, that it's something else, that it's a different type of society. Remember, this is a type of society, right? Humans have different ways historically that they have socially organized, and civilization is a single type of society, and it is a silly and stupid and bad one. Even though it's got a lot of great stuff, even though we have, it's got us a lot of great stuff, okay? I think at this point, I often get lost kind of attacking civilization. And I have these rebuttals to kind of keep me on track. These are things that people will often say. They'll often say, technotopia, like civilization has got us a lot of great stuff. We have extended the average lifespan of privileged people who have access to modern medicine with modern medicine. Still, the distribution of modern medicine is unequal, and not everybody has equal access to modern medicine. So that's a problem. And and at what cost, right? At what cost? I mean, the medical industry is one of the most pollutive industries that we have. Everything is single use and thrown away, and of course you got to be sterile and you got to prevent disease and COVID-19, so let's use plastic bags and no more returnable bags and blah blah blah. But at this point, the technotopia thing, the idea that technology is going to save us or that we're going to somehow go to space, first of all, it's a maybe, right? At this point, it's a fantasy. It's like, maybe that's going to happen. Maybe we're going to bomb each other back to the Stone Age. Maybe we're going to have disease after disease after disease, and maybe we're going to, who knows what's going to happen. But even if we do have a magical Jetsons, Star Trek, Star Wars, space travel society, money, right? It's gonna cost money, and it's only, unless we have space age, communism, magic, everything, altruism, and we're all great, which again, maybe, but this, I wrote down Buckminster Fuller because I like this quote. If you want to solve a problem, don't work on the existing model. Try to create a new model that makes the old model obsolete. So this idea that even if we got rid of capitalism and even if we had global communism, which somehow was not tyrannical and totalitarian, and we were all really altruistically working together, we can't even put our masks on. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to happen. Hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, we evolved to live in small groups. Hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years of evolution, we evolved to be land-based, right? We evolved to live with the land, and now we're going to go to space. Now we're going to go It's like so silly. And then you could say, well, rewilding is stupid because civilization is natural. Civilization, sure, it spread naturally, like it happened, factually, it happened. Civilization is essentially, it's a permanent human settlement that requires the importation of resources, right? That requires agriculture, really, right? I mean, the earliest civilizations evolved or developed hand in hand with agriculture. That's how we trace it. And so you almost could say civilization is agriculture, and if you don't have agriculture, totalitarian, monocropping agriculture, industrialized agriculture as we understand it, then you wouldn't have a civilization. Sure, it spread naturally. I mean, a lot of things happen naturally. You walk in the room, you trip on a shoelace, you fall on your face, you break your nose naturally. It all happened naturally. You still try to kind of look out, watch where you're walking, make sure you don't step in a pile of poop. And I often think of this monk story. I'm sure this story has been told more than once in different times in different parts of the world. And the story is basically the conqueror, the warrior, the colonist is conquering the countryside and comes upon a monk, a religious, holy person, a peaceful person meditating. And the conqueror takes his sword, puts it to the neck of the monk and says, "How can you sit there without flinching?" The monk is just sitting there peacefully. The conqueror says, "How can you sit there without flinching? Don't you know that I am a man who can cut off your head without blinking an eye?" And the monk just looks back at him peacefully and smiles and says, "Don't you know that I am a man who can have his head cut off without blinking an eye?" And then, he cuts his head off and conquers the countryside and then creates industrial civilizations that somebody elected Donald Trump for president. And the point here, I think, is that if peaceful people don't resist, then violent people will win. So it's natural, peaceful people naturally are doing their peaceful thing. Violent people naturally are attacking the peaceful people with violence. And if the peaceful people, I'm not saying use violence. That's not the point, right? The point is that violence is natural. That doesn't make it right. Selfishness is natural. But when you live in a small society, when you live intimately with a small group of people, that type of society manages selfishness, manages dishonesty better than a big society. I mean, a big society, you can have real criminals. You can have people who are career criminals, who hurt people. That's all they do is they hurt people. And nobody's checking on them, nobody's watching them except the cops, I guess, It doesn't matter that it's natural, right? It's not working. So it doesn't matter that it's natural. We naturally built civilizations, and naturally we need to rewild now. The other thing that often comes up is things like this oxygenation event, so long, I don't know when the hell it was, billions of years ago, when oxygen developed. The great oxygenation event resulted in a mass extinction of various forms of cyanobacteria, different life forms that were dependent on the environment as it was at the time, devoid of oxygen. So when oxygen happened, there was a mass extinction. When the meteor hit, boom, the dinosaurs experienced a mass extinction event. And so a lot of people will say, just because there's a mass extinction, even if it might be caused by human interaction, look, we're going to save it with technology. It's natural anyway. And look, we've survived a lot of mass extinctions before, and this mass extinction was actually good because the oxygenation event, while it resulted in the extinction of various forms of cyanobacteria, it actually gave rise to new forms of consciousness. And so they're saying, oh, maybe civilization is just here to give rise to a new form of consciousness, which I think is kind of sickening perspective. That's just my personal assessment. Assuming that you agree with me and you see that civilization is inherently unsustainable and inherently destructive to the environment and to its human participants, then you've got to rewild. And what rewilding is basically contributing to the willed nature of the place, like practicing permaculture in the forest, right? Or rewilding yourself and figuring out how to connect with wild systems, with natural systems. Maybe that means making a basket. Maybe that means learning to identify the 10 most common trees within a 10-mile radius of your house, or learning to identify or getting into tracking animals, or whatever that is. We know what rewilding is, right? This is why the whole talk is kind of silly, because We know what it is. We know what we have to do, and yet we're still kind of enacting the same make-believe. We're still kind of playing the same game of, get the money, buy the paper, use markers, stick the papers together so that your talk doesn't even make sense, so that the papers get stuck. What are we doing? What am I doing with these flippy papers? And we're making this video. What are we doing here? I'm just going to go with that. You can see it, and it says barriers. So these are the barriers to rewilding, which this is like me wringing my hands and saying, I can't, right? It means in society. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying when it comes to shifting paradigms in my own brain, trying to inspire children and adults when I'm working with them, teaching them how to make a basket or how to identify plants, we do experience these barriers. And I'm just going to go through them quick. The barriers are land ownership. Somebody owns the land. The Home Depot says, hey, get out of here. Or there's laws and politics, and they say you can't do that. You can't clip these willows, or you can't pick acorns here in the park. You can't do this, right? There's a law. You can't sleep on the street. You can't sleep in the woods. You can't go sleep in the Eastern Prom, or even sleep anywhere. It's all land is owned, right? And there's laws and politics governing that, which is this is the way it is. This is the world that we are in, right? So you can wring your hands and you can say, it's so big, right? The system is so big and it's been existent for thousands of years, and how can we do anything? But we can still offer resistance to these things. We can knock on doors and make friends with landowners, and we can engage in politics. We can vote for a change, right? Even though if voting did anything, they'd make it illegal, right? We can still kind of participate and say, maybe. But this is a big barrier too, time and work, right? We have to work. We have limited access to time. I didn't even write this down, but it goes kind of with time and work and access to wild space. So because of the history of the world, because the history of the world involves various instances of different types of slavery, right? Slavery where people are held in chains and whipped and brought to different parts of the world. Slavery where people are economic slaves, people are wage slaves, and people are working for $3 an hour, but they can't leave because of immigration, because they're undocumented. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why inequality continues to persist. And saying that inequality exists because some people are better than others, that is supremacist thinking. That is Nazi talk. That's not the truth, right? The truth is, I am the way I am because of my life. I think the way I think because of my parents, because of my teachers, because of my girlfriends, and because of my boyfriends, and because of my employers and coworkers, and all of that has shaped me. And I make decisions, but those decisions are influenced on my past. And it works generationally too. It works for cultures too. So acknowledge that stuff, right? The toxins are there too. I mean, we've got toxins in the water. There's toxins, there's algal blooms. There's people are polluting as we speak. They're still dumping pollutants. And so that requires resistance too. The superego is the biggest barrier to rewilding. What this is basically the superego is the culture. It's mother culture telling you what to do. The ego is me. The superego is like we. The superego is this identification with settler colonialist society that we've really got to try to distance ourselves from. And so acknowledging these barriers, acknowledging that we have different access to wild space, and trying to take responsibility for that brings me to the last page. So rewilding urban space is really not going to happen fully without rewilding humanity. Or maybe the spaces are going to be rewilded and then humanity's going to rewild, or maybe the other way around. But this is what it really comes down to, rewilding humanity. And I like to think about, I want to put this on a bumper sticker, put this on a t-shirt, meet your need. Or maybe feed your need. Feed is kind of a little more consumptive, but I like meet your need. And the needs are the sacred four, or really the sacred six. These are really common in a lot of survivalist nature connection circles, and you might be familiar with them. And, it's fun ask little kids, what do you need to survive in the woods? What's the most important thing you need to survive? They all say, food! Yes, food is amazing, right? I love food, but actually, you can go a long time without food. You can go longer without food than you can go without water. But especially in a cold weather place, you can die in one night without shelter. Then you need food. No, then you need water. Shelter, water, then food, fire. Then food. Shelter, water, fire, then food, then community. Right? You need community. And then I like music. Shelter, water, fire, food, community, music. That's what we need. And we can build on those list of needs. We can say, what do I really need? Oh, and my iPhone, right? That's what I really need. But it's meeting these needs without destroying the world, without destroying ourselves or wanting to die or hurting each other or fighting and screaming and enslaving people and causing genocide. And it might be about this idea of a new economy. So what is the new economy? If we're going to have some altruistic post-money, it might be time is the new economy. There's an idea of the gift economy, right? So this kind of this idea, different forms of reciprocity. And the idea that we can help each other meet our needs in our local community with persistence and patience and creativity and tolerance, fills me with a sense of hope. It fills me with a sense of optimism. But it also reminds me of a responsibility that we have to flip the paradigm and really, social justice, the social justice paradigm. So rewilding is inherently a social justice movement, right? Just as civilization by its very design is a thing that it's a human machine that it swallows other humans and eats the land, right? It's like a big smoky monster. Rewilding is a movement that seeks to take responsibility for social injustice, for social inequity, for environmental injustice, right? We want to connect with nature because we know that we're not connected with it. We want to eat healthy food because we know that Lunchables and McDonald's and movie theater popcorn, we know that stuff is not healthy. Sour Patch Kids, we know that's not nourishing. And so if you know that you crave healthy food and access to beautiful wild space and meaningful work and all the things that feed humanity and feed your soul, and you're not completely blind or got your head in a 6-inch hole in the sand, you've got to recognize that civilization is bad in part because it has created global inequity. Civilization is bad in part because the exploitation is divided unequally, right? Not everybody is exploited by civilized systems the same. Even though civilizations are inherently exploitative, there are some people like me who are descendants of settlers, colonists who have access to white privilege, male privilege, cisgender privilege, or whatever type of privileges that I have. There are many, and I try to use my privilege in ways that I can to work to fight for social justice. And so what I think is really funny is when I meet people who are say they're into rewilding, or they say that they're against civilization, or they say that they want to save the world, but then they start laughing and scoffing at social justice warriors. I just want to say to them, I want to say you're wrong, but I also want to say, please explain to me your logic because it doesn't make any sense to me. I think that what rewilding is trying to take responsibility for the past 10,000 years of supremacist, civilized, industrialized, settler colonialism, right? Rewilding is, I don't know if rewilding is a synonym for decolonizing. Rewilding might be decolonizing for colonists, maybe. Maybe rewilding is kind of tricking settler colonialists or kind of coaching them or encouraging them. I don't want to trick anybody. You know, I want to inspire people and I want to remind people. I just want to remind people of this word, paradigms, and how important this word is and how it all comes down to a paradigm shift. And this is the last page. This is actually the last page of my book here. But this is to remind you that if we were having a class, this is when I would pull out a marker and I'd say, what do you think? What do you think we can do? What does rewilding look like to you? How can we rewild urban spaces if we live in the Bronx? How can we rewild urban spaces if we lived in Southeast DC? How can we rewild urban spaces if we live in Bangor or Portland or Camden or Bar Harbor or wherever we're going to live? And it's blank. It's a blank canvas. Remember that it's bioregionally specific. So even what they do in Bangor, you know, so-called Bangor, is going to be different. All the places are different. The communities of people are different. And if we can remind each other how dependent we are on our local land, our local community, and make decisions based on that, we wouldn't make as many mistakes as I have made. And we wouldn't make the mistakes that we keep making. We wouldn't be... A lot could change. Thanks for the time. I hope it made some sense.